Alexander Phillips froze in horror as he witnessed the alien shopkeeper roughly manhandle a frail, malnourished Vulcan female. The intergalactic trading post bustled around him, but time seemed to stand still in this moment of casual cruelty. "Fresh meat for your carnivorous pets," the shopkeeper bellowed, holding up the limp form of the Vulcan woman. "Cheap and nutritious." Alexander's stomach churned. He'd seen many disturbing sights as a human merchant of exotic goods, but this crossed a line. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "How much?" he demanded, locking eyes with the startled shopkeeper. Minutes later, Alexander led the weakened Vulcan woman away from the pet shop. Her emerald eyes, dulled by suffering, met his. "I'm Nina," she whispered hoarsely. "Why did you save me?" Alexander's mind raced. He'd acted on instinct, but now the implications of his actions hit him. He'd just purchased a sentient being, an illegal act that could cost him everything. "Let's get you medical attention first," he said, guiding her towards his ship. As Alexander tended to Nina's immediate needs, she revealed her past. Once a respected scientist on Vulcan, she'd been captured and sold into slavery by a rival species. Her brilliant mind, now a repository of advanced Vulcan technology, could be the key to humanity's survival against hostile alien forces. Alexander made a split-second decision. He would smuggle Nina back to Earth, risking everything to protect her and the knowledge she carried. As they prepared for departure, alarms blared across the trading post. "Attention! Escaped slave reported. All ships, prepare for inspection." Alexander cursed, firing up the engines. They barely cleared the docking clamps when the first pursuer appeared on their sensors. "Hold on!" he shouted to Nina as he executed a series of evasive maneuvers. Their ship weaved through the dense traffic of the trading post, laser fire streaking past them. Alexander's expert piloting kept them just ahead of their attackers, but he knew they couldn't outrun them forever. "Nina, I need you to access the navigation computer," he called out. "Plot us a course through the nearest unstable wormhole." Nina's fingers flew across the console, her scientific expertise evident despite her weakened state. "Course plotted, but the wormhole's stability is only at 62%. We risk complete molecular disintegration." "Better than certain capture," Alexander grimaced, pushing the ship to its limits. As they approached the swirling vortex of the wormhole, Nina spoke softly. "Why are you risking so much for me?" Alexander met her gaze, seeing not just the valuable scientific asset, but a person who'd endured unimaginable suffering. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered. With pursuers closing in from all sides, their ship plunged into the wormhole. Alexander reached out, grasping Nina's hand as reality warped around them. Whatever lay on the other side, they would face it together. A human merchant and a Vulcan scientist, bound by circumstance and growing attraction, embarking on a journey that would challenge them both and potentially change the fate of humanity. The wormhole spat out Alexander's ship in a burst of light and energy, leaving them disoriented but intact. As the cockpit displays flickered back to life, Alexander let out a sigh of relief. They had survived the perilous journey. "We made it," he breathed, turning to Nina. The Vulcan woman nodded weakly, her emerald eyes clouded with exhaustion. "Indeed. But where are we?" Alexander's fingers danced across the navigation console. "According to these readings, we're in Earth's solar system. We're close to—" His words were cut short as a violent tremor shook the ship. Alarms blared, and red warning lights bathed the cockpit in an ominous glow. "What's happening?" Nina asked, gripping her seat. Alexander's eyes widened as he read the incoming data. "Massive solar flare. It's interfering with our navigation systems." The ship lurched again, more violently this time. Alexander fought with the controls, trying to stabilize their trajectory. "We can't make it to Earth. We need to land, now." Through the view screen, the red planet loomed before them. "Mars," Alexander muttered. "It's our only option." As they entered the Martian atmosphere, the ship shuddered and groaned under the strain. Alexander's expert piloting kept them from burning up, but their descent was far from smooth. The barren Martian landscape rushed up to meet them. "Brace for impact," Alexander shouted. With a bone-jarring crash, the ship slammed into the rusty soil, skidding to a stop near a cluster of gleaming domes. Mars colony. Inside the ship, Alexander shook his head to clear it, then turned to check on Nina. She was slumped in her seat, her breathing labored. "Nina?" He unbuckled himself and moved to her side. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly. "The atmosphere. It's not suitable for my physiology." Alexander cursed under his breath. The ship's life support systems, damaged in the crash, were struggling to maintain a breathable environment for the Vulcan. A harsh banging on the ship's hull interrupted them. Alexander helped Nina to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way to the airlock. As the door hissed open, they found themselves facing a stern-looking man in a security uniform, flanked by armed guards. "I'm Marcus Reeves, Mars Colony Security Chief," the man announced, his eyes narrowing as they fell on Nina. "And you two have a lot of explaining to do." Alexander's mind raced. He couldn't reveal Nina's true identity or the circumstances of her rescue. "She's a refugee," he blurted out. "I found her in distress. She's a scientist. Her knowledge could be invaluable to humanity." Reeves raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Is that so?" He turned to Nina. "And what do you have to say for yourself?" Nina straightened, summoning her strength. "I am willing to assist in any way I can," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Reeves studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Fine, you can stay for now, but you'll be under constant observation. Dr. Chen." He called over his shoulder, and a woman in a lab coat approached. "Get her to the medical bay and see what she can do. As for you," he turned back to Alexander, "you'll be debriefed thoroughly." As Nina was led away by Dr. Chen, Alexander caught her eye. A silent understanding passed between them. They were far from safe, but they had bought themselves some time. Over the next few days, Nina's brilliance began to shine through. Despite her weakened state, she quickly grasped the intricacies of the colony's terraforming efforts. Working alongside Dr. Alara Chen, she proposed modifications to the atmospheric processors that yielded immediate improvements. Alexander, meanwhile, put his merchant skills to use. He tapped into his network of contacts, discreetly seeking information about their pursuers. What he learned chilled him to the bone. "Zarktai," he muttered, staring at the data pad in his temporary quarters. The name was whispered in fear across the galaxy. A ruthless bounty hunter known for always catching his prey. A soft knock at his door jolted him from his thoughts. It was Nina, looking healthier than he'd seen her since their escape. "Alexander," she said, her voice stronger now, "I need to talk to you." He ushered her in, closing the door behind her. "What is it?" Nina's emerald eyes met his, a mix of emotions swirling in their depths. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me." Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Nina, The moment was shattered by a blaring alarm. A voice crackled over the colony's communication system. "Unidentified ship entering Martian orbit. All personnel to battle stations." Alexander's blood ran cold. He knew without a doubt who was on that ship. "We need to leave," he said, grabbing Nina's hand. "Now." As they raced through the colony's corridors, alarms blaring around them, Alexander realized their journey was a long way to go. The real challenge was just beginning. Alexander and Nina raced through the colony's corridors, alarms blaring around them. They reached the hangar bay, where a sleek prototype spacecraft stood waiting. "This is our only chance," Alexander said, punching in an access code. The ship's airlock hissed open. As they clambered inside, Nina's keen eyes scanned the unfamiliar controls. "I can operate this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Alexander nodded, strapping himself into the co-pilot seat. "Get us out of here." Nina's fingers danced across the console, bringing the engines to life. The hangar bay doors opened, revealing the rust-colored Martian landscape. With a burst of power, they shot into the sky, leaving the colony and their pursuers behind. As they broke through the planet's thin atmosphere, Alexander let out a sigh of relief, but their respite was short-lived. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. "The life support system is unstable," Nina reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'll need to make constant adjustments to maintain a breathable atmosphere." Alexander unbuckled his harness, moving to check the ship's systems. A sudden lurch sent him stumbling, his head slamming against a bulkhead. He crumpled to the floor, dazed. "Alexander!" Nina called out, unable to leave her post at the controls. He waved weakly, pulling himself back into his seat. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though the room spun around him. As they hurtled towards Earth, Nina divided her attention between piloting the experimental craft and keeping Alexander conscious. His condition deteriorated, leaving her to handle most of the critical decision-making. During a moment of clarity, Alexander grabbed Nina's arm. "Nina," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have a contact on Earth, Commander Jack Harper, old friend from my military days. He might be our only hope." Nina nodded, committing the name to memory. She opened her mouth to respond, but a proximity alert cut her off. Her eyes widened as she read the sensor data. "It's Zarkthai," she breathed. "He's found us." Thinking quickly, Nina accessed the ship's schematics. Her scientific mind raced, seeing possibilities where others might see only components and wiring. "I can create a makeshift cloaking device," she said, her fingers already prying open a control panel. "It won't last long, but it might buy us some time." As Nina worked, rerouting power and repurposing systems, Alexander drifted in and out of consciousness. The ship shuddered and groaned, its systems further destabilized by Nina's modifications. A faint shimmer rippled across the hull as the makeshift cloaking device activated. On their sensors, Zarkthai's ship veered off, having lost their trail. Nina allowed herself a moment of relief before turning her attention back to their approach to Earth. As they neared the planet's orbit, new alarms blared. "Earth's defense grid has detected us," Nina reported, her voice tense. "They're preparing to open fire." Drawing on her scientific knowledge and newly acquired piloting skills, Nina executed a series of complex maneuvers. The ship rolled and dove, narrowly evading incoming missiles. "Alexander," Nina called out, her hands never leaving the controls. "I need that frequency for Commander Harper." Alexander stirred, fighting through the fog in his mind. He recited a string of numbers, which Nina quickly input into the communication system. As another volley of missiles streaked towards them, a gruff voice crackled through the speakers. "This is Commander Harper. Identify yourself." "Commander," Nina responded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I'm with Alexander Phillips. We need immediate assistance and safe passage." There was a moment of tense silence before Harper responded. "Understood. Transmitting coordinates for a secure landing site now. I'll handle the defense grid." True to his word, the incoming fire ceased. Nina adjusted their course, following the transmitted coordinates to a remote area in what Alexander weakly identified as the Mojave Desert. The landing was rough, the ship's systems finally giving out as they touched down on Earth's surface. Nina unbuckled herself, rushing to Alexander's side. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. The ship's airlock opened, revealing a team of heavily armed soldiers, led by a stern-faced man Nina assumed was Commander Harper. The soldiers raised their weapons at the sight of Nina, but Harper held up a hand, ordering them to stand down. "Get a medical team here now," Harper barked, taking in Alexander's condition. As Alexander was rushed to a nearby underground facility, Nina found herself surrounded by wary soldiers. Harper approached her, his expression unreadable. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. Nina cast one last glance at the retreating medical team before squaring her shoulders and following Harper. She knew the real challenges were just beginning, but for now, they were safe on Earth. As she walked, Nina's mind raced with thoughts of the valuable information she carried, the dangers that still lurked, and the uncertain future that lay ahead for her and Alexander. Alexander and Nina. As they walked, Nina's mind raced with thoughts of the valuable information she carried, the dangers that still lurked, and the uncertain future that lay ahead for them both. The underground facility bustled with activity as medical personnel rushed Alexander to the infirmary. Nina found herself ushered into a sparse, windowless room for debriefing. Hours passed as she answered a barrage of questions from stern-faced military officials, carefully omitting details about her true origins. Days blurred together as Nina divided her time between Alexander's bedside and rigorous interrogations. She worked tirelessly with Earth scientists, sharing her knowledge while constantly aware of the suspicious glances cast her way. As Alexander regained his strength, he noticed a shift in Nina's demeanor. The once timid Vulcan now moved with purpose, her emerald eyes sharp and calculating. Their time together grew more intimate, stolen moments in the quiet of his recovery room. One evening, as they pored over schematics for Earth's defense systems, Alexander's hand brushed against Nina's. The touch lingered, electric. Their eyes met, and suddenly the room felt too small, too warm. "Nina," Alexander breathed, his voice husky. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Commander Harper strode in, his face grim. "I'm sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but we need to begin the next phase of testing." Nina straightened, her face a mask of calm. "I understand." Alexander started to protest, but Nina silenced him with a look. As she followed Harper out, she glanced back, her eyes conveying a silent message. "Trust me." The tests were brutal. Nina's body and mind were pushed to their limits as she navigated complex simulations and underwent invasive medical examinations. Through it all, she maintained her composure, even as she felt the watchful eyes of Earth's military leaders, scrutinizing her every move. During a particularly harrowing simulation, Nina found herself in a virtual control room of a human colony under attack. Alarms blared as she worked furiously, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces. With seconds to spare, she rerouted power from non-essential systems, strengthening the colony's shields just as a barrage of enemy fire hit. As the simulation ended, Nina became aware of the stunned silence in the observation room. Even the most skeptical officials couldn't deny her brilliance. Meanwhile, Alexander threw himself into his own mission. Utilizing his vast network of contacts, he pieced together fragments of information about Zarktai's movements. The picture that emerged was troubling. "He's here," Alexander told Harper, spreading out a series of data pads on the commander's desk. "On Earth, disguised as a human." Harper's face darkened. "How sure are you?" "Certain," Alexander replied. "We need to act fast." As they formulated a plan to track down the elusive bounty hunter, Nina made a breakthrough in the research labs. Combining Vulcan principles with human technology, she developed a prototype for an advanced shielding system. Dr. Ilara Chen, now working alongside Nina, marveled at the implications. "This could revolutionize our entire defense strategy," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. Nina allowed herself a small smile, but it faded as she noticed a group of unfamiliar men in the dark suits enter the lab. Their eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Later that night, as Nina worked late in the lab, she overheard a heated conversation between Harper and one of the suited men. "She's too valuable an asset to be left unchecked," the man hissed. Harper's response was muffled, but his tone was clearly defensive. Nina's heart raced as she silently made her way back to her quarters. She found Alexander waiting for her, his face etched with concern. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "Tonight." Nina nodded, her mind already calculating their odds of success. As they finalized their escape plan, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. The sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors. "Zarktai!" Alexander breathed, grabbing Nina's hand. "We're out of time." They raced through the chaos, dodging panicked personnel and debris from exploding panels. Nina's recently honed combat skills came into play as they encountered a group of Zarktai's mercenaries. She moved with fluid grace, disarming one attacker and using his weapon to take down two more. Alexander stared at her, momentarily stunned. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he quipped as they continued their flight. They reached the hangar just as another explosion rocked the facility. Through the smoke, they spotted a sleek spacecraft, its hull gleaming with the telltale signs of Nina's Vulcan-inspired modifications. "There's our ticket out of here," Alexander said, sprinting towards the ship. As they prepared for takeoff, the hangar doors burst open. Zarktai himself strode in, his human disguise discarded, revealing his true alien form. His eyes locked onto Nina with predatory intensity. "Hold on!" Alexander shouted as he fired up the engines. The ship shot out of the hangar, narrowly missing a barrage of energy blasts from Zarktai's weapons. As they broke through Earth's atmosphere, Nina worked furiously to stabilize their systems and activate the experimental shields. "We did it," Alexander said, allowing himself a moment of relief. But his expression quickly sobered as he checked their long-range sensors. "We've got multiple bogeys on our tail. Looks like we've made enemies on all sides." Nina's fingers danced across the control panel, plotting a course. "We need somewhere to regroup, to plan our next move." As if in answer to her words, a message flashed across their communication screen. It was from Harper, encrypted and brief. Coordinates for a hidden outpost on one of Jupiter's moons. Alexander and Nina exchanged a look. It was a risk, but they were out of options. "Setting course for Jupiter," Nina announced, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. As Earth receded behind them, Nina and Alexander found themselves in close quarters, the intensity of their recent experiences bringing their emotions to the surface. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the chaos of their situation faded away. Alexander reached out, gently cupping Nina's face. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we're in this together." Nina leaned into his touch, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. "Together," she echoed. As they journeyed deeper into the solar system, the massive form of Jupiter loomed before them, a silent sentinel guarding the sanctuary they hoped to find. But even as they approached their destination, both Nina and Alexander knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger adventure, one that would test not only their survival skills, but the very nature of their growing bond. Relationship. The ship hummed with energy as they pushed deeper into the solar system, Jupiter's massive form growing larger on their view screen. As they approached the gas giant, warning lights suddenly flashed across the control panel. The ship lurched, nearly throwing them from their seats. "What's happening?" Alexander asked, squeezing the armrest. Nina's fingers flew over the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The Vulcan modifications are reacting poorly to Jupiter's radiation. Our systems are destabilizing." The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring. Through the view screen, they could see Europa, Jupiter's icy moon, looming before them. "We need to land," Nina said, her voice tense. "Now!" Alexander nodded, taking the helm. Together they fought to control the failing spacecraft as it plummeted towards Europa's surface. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, ice crystals forming on the viewports. With a bone-jarring impact, they skidded across the frozen landscape, leaving a deep furrow in their wake. When they finally ground to a halt, silence fell, broken only by the hiss of escaping air and the ping of cooling metal. "You okay?" Alexander asked, turning to Nina. She nodded, already unbuckling her harness. "We need to move. This ship won't provide shelter for long in these conditions." They donned their environmental suits and stepped out onto Europa's icy surface. Wind howled around them, driving particles of frozen water vapor like tiny needles against their visors. "The coordinates Harper gave us," Alexander said, checking his wrist computer. "They're indicating something beneath the ice, about 2 kilometers from here." Nina scanned the barren landscape. "We should hurry. Night will fall soon, and temperatures will drop even further." They set off across the frozen wasteland, each step careful on the slippery surface. As they walked, the ice beneath their feet creaked and groaned, unsettling sounds in the otherwise silent expanse. An hour into their journey, they encountered their first obstacle, a massive crevasse, easily 30 meters across. "We'll have to go around," Alexander said, his voice tight with frustration. Nina shook her head. "No time. The temperature's already dropping rapidly. We need to find shelter soon." She pulled out a device from her pack, attaching it to her suit. With a practiced motion, she fired a grappling line across the chasm. It bit into the ice on the other side with a satisfying chunk. "Ready?" she asked, extending her hand to Alexander. He took it, his grip firm despite the bulky gloves. Together, they leapt into the void, the line whirring as it retracted, pulling them across the crevasse. They landed hard on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. As they continued their journey, Alexander noticed Nina moving with greater ease than himself. "You're handling this cold better than I am," he observed. "Vulcan physiology," she explained. "We evolved on a desert world, but our bodies are adept at regulating temperature extremes." Finally, they reached the coordinates. Before them stood a sheer ice wall, stretching high above them. There, Nina pointed. Barely visible was the outline of an airlock, long since frozen over. They worked together, using their suit's heating elements and Nina's advanced tools to cut through the ice. As the last chunk fell away, the airlock's control panel flickered to life, responding to Alexander's access codes. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the outer door slid open. They stepped inside, the inner door sealing behind them as the chamber cycled. As the inner door opened, they found themselves in a vast, dark chamber. Alexander activated his suit lights, revealing banks of equipment covered in a thick layer of dust. "What is this place?" Nina asked, her voice filled with wonder. Alexander moved to a nearby console, brushing away years of neglect. As he worked to bring the systems online, he replied, "If I had to guess, an abandoned research facility, probably from the early days of human-alien collaboration." Lights flickered on, illuminating the sprawling underground complex. Outdated but functional equipment lined the walls, and a faint hum indicated that at least some power systems were still operational. "We need to get life support and heating online," Nina said, already moving towards what looked like an environmental control station. As they worked to revive the long-dormant facility, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple hideout. The technology here, while old, spoke of a level of cooperation between species that he had never seen before. "Nina," he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, "I think we've found more than just a temporary shelter. This could be the key to clearing your name, maybe even preventing a war." She looked up from her work, her eyes meeting his across the room. The weight of their discovery hung between them, a mixture of hope and trepidation. Before she could respond, a proximity alert blared from one of the consoles. Alexander rushed over, his heart racing as he interpreted the data. "Multiple ships entering the Jovian system," he reported, his voice grim. "Earth military, Zarktea's vessel, and a Vulcan cruiser." Nina's face paled. "They're all converging here, on Europa." As the implications of their situation sank in, Alexander and Nina shared a look of willpower. They were trapped on this icy moon, with limited resources and multiple hostile forces closing in. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together. The facility shuddered, dust raining down from the ceiling, as a distant explosion echoed through the complex. "They've found us," Nina said, her voice tight with tension. Alexander nodded grimly. "We need to get to the command center. Maybe we can access the base's defenses from there." They raced through the winding corridors, the sounds of battle growing louder with each passing moment. As they burst into the command center, they found Dr. Chen and her team already there, frantically working at the outdated consoles. "The outer defenses are failing," Dr. Chen reported, her face pale with worry. "Zarkthai's forces are breaking through." Alexander's eyes scanned the room, landing on an ancient terminal in the corner. "There might be something we can use," he said, moving quickly to the dusty machine. As Nina and Dr. Chen coordinated the remaining defenses, Alexander delved into the facility's databanks. His eyes widened as he uncovered schematics for a prototype planetary defense system hidden beneath Europa's surface. "I think I've found our salvation," he called out, "but it's going to be risky." Nina joined him, her eyes quickly taking in the information on the screen. "A planetary defense system? Can we activate it?" Alexander nodded. "I can lead a team to the control center, but it's deep beneath the ice. We'll have to move fast." As if to emphasize his point, the facility rocked with another explosion, closer this time. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered ominously. "Go," Nina said, her hand briefly squeezing his shoulder. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Alexander gathered a small team of volunteers and set off into the depths of the facility. They descended through narrow maintenance shafts and winding corridors, the temperature dropping steadily as they went deeper. Meanwhile, Nina and Dr. Chen worked feverishly to fortify their position. Nina's fingers flew over the console, rerouting power and sealing off sections of the facility to slow the invaders' advance. "We need more time," Dr. Chen muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked to boost the remaining shields. Nina nodded, her mind racing. She glanced around the lab, her eyes landing on various pieces of equipment. An idea formed in her mind, born of desperation and scientific ingenuity. "We can use the lab equipment to create makeshift weapons," she said, already moving to gather components. "If we can't keep them out, we'll make them regret getting in." As Nina and Dr. Chen's team prepared for the coming assault, Alexander's group pressed deeper into Europa's icy depths. The passageways narrowed, the walls glistening with strange bioluminescent growths. Suddenly a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. The ice beneath their feet trembled, and from the darkness ahead emerged a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, its body a strange fusion of crustacean and eel, adapted to life in Europa's subsurface oceans. "Hold your fire," Alexander ordered as his team raised their weapons. "We don't want to cause a cave-in." The creature lunged forward, its maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. Alexander rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. His team scattered, using the narrow confines of the tunnel to their advantage. As they fought off the hostile life form, more of its kind emerged from the depths. Alexander realized with growing dread that their presence had disturbed an entire ecosystem, one that had evolved in isolation for millions of years. Back in the main facility, the outer defenses finally gave way. Zarktai and his elite squad breached the complex, their advanced weapons carving a path of destruction. Nina stood ready, her improvised weapons distributed among the remaining defenders. As the first of Zarktai's mercenaries rounded the corner, she activated her device. A burst of electromagnetic energy crackled through the air, shorting out the invaders' weapons and sending them reeling. "Now!" Nina shouted, and her team surged forward, engaging the stunned mercenaries in close combat. The battle raged through the facility's corridors, a desperate struggle of survival. Dr. Chen moved from person to person, tending to the wounded as best she could with their limited supplies. In the icy tunnels below, Alexander's team finally reached the control center for the planetary defense system. As they worked to activate it, Alexander made a chilling discovery. "The power source is unstable," he said, his voice tight with concern. "If we overload it, we could destroy all of Europa." His team exchanged worried glances. They could hear the sounds of battle echoing from above, growing closer with each passing moment. Alexander's mind raced, searching for a solution. His eyes darted across the ancient control panels, taking in information at a frantic pace. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "We can reconfigure the system," he said, his fingers already flying across the controls. "Instead of a direct attack, we'll emit a targeted electromagnetic pulse. It should disable Zarktai's ships and weapons without risking Europa's destruction." As Alexander worked, Nina found herself face to face with Zarktai himself. The bounty hunter had discarded his human disguise, his alien features twisted in a snarl of rage. "You've cost me everything," he growled, advancing on Nina with predatory intent. Nina stood her ground, her makeshift weapon held ready. "It's over, Zarktai. Your ship, your weapons, they're all about to become useless." As if on cue, a wave of energy pulsed through the facility. Zarktai's advanced weaponry sputtered and died, leaving him momentarily stunned. Nina seized the opportunity, launching herself at the bounty hunter with all the skills she had acquired. They grappled fiercely, Nina's Vulcan strength matching Zarktai's alien physiology. As they fought, the facility around them began to crumble, weakened by the battle and the electromagnetic pulse. Alexander raced back through the collapsing tunnels, desperate to reach Nina and the others. He arrived just in time to see Nina land a crushing blow to Zarktai's midsection, sending the bounty hunter crashing into a wall. "We need to get out of here," Alexander shouted over the sound of crumbling ice and groaning metal. "The whole place is coming down." As they gathered the survivors, including the injured Dr. Chen, a new alert sounded from the few remaining functional systems. Alexander's face paled as he read the incoming data. "A massive solar flare is heading this way," he announced, his voice grim. "If we don't get off this moon soon, we'll be fried along with every piece of unshielded technology." They raced through the disintegrating facility, searching for a way out. Hope seemed lost until they stumbled upon an old emergency shuttle hidden in a forgotten hangar. As they assessed the shuttle's capabilities, A harsh reality set in. The life support systems could only sustain a limited number of passengers for the journey to safety. Alexander and Nina exchanged a look, the weight of the decision heavy in their eyes. They knew that not everyone would make it out alive, and the choice of who would stay behind to operate the launch systems loomed over them like a shadow. With time running out, hostile forces regrouping, and a deadly solar flare approaching, they faced an impossible decision. The fate of not just their small group, but potentially the future of interspecies relations in the galaxy, hung in the balance as they prepared to make their final stand on Europa's icy surface. Alexander's mind raced, weighing their limited options as the facility continued to crumble around them. "The shuttle," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's our only chance." They sprinted through the collapsing corridors, helping the injured as they went. Zarkthai, still stunned from his fight with Nina, was unceremoniously dragged along. They couldn't risk leaving him behind to potentially cause more havoc. As they reached the hangar, Alexander's heart sank. The shuttle was ancient, clearly not designed for the number of people they needed to evacuate. He shared a grim look with Nina, both understanding the impossible choice before them. "We don't have time to debate," Nina said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I'll start the pre-flight sequence. You get everyone on board." Alexander nodded, pushing aside his reservations as he began ushering people into the shuttle. Dr. Chen, her face pale with pain from her injuries, paused at the entrance. "Someone needs to stay behind to operate the launch systems," she said, her eyes meeting Alexander's. Before he could protest, a violent tremor shook the hangar. Chunks of ice rained down, forcing them to retreat into the shuttle. "No time!" Alexander shouted, sealing the airlock behind them. "We'll have to override the launch sequence manually." The shuttle's interior was cramped, filled with the acrid smell of fear and sweat. Alexander squeezed his way to the cockpit, where Nina was already bringing the ancient systems online. "How bad is it?" he asked, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. Nina's fingers danced across the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Bad. Life support is minimal, the engines are outdated, and the shielding is practically non-existent." Another tremor rocked the shuttle, more violent than the last. Through the view screen, they could see the hangar beginning to cave in. "We're out of time," Alexander said, taking manual control of the launch sequence. "Everyone hold on." The shuttle's engines roared to life, straining against years of disuse. With a bone-jarring lurch, they lifted off, narrowly escaping as the hangar collapsed behind them. As they broke through Europa's icy crust, alarms blared throughout the shuttle. Alexander struggled with the controls, fighting to keep them stable as they entered the void of space. "Alexander," Nina called out, her voice tense, "we have another problem." He glanced at her screen and felt his blood run cold. The massive solar flare they had detected earlier was barreling towards them, its deadly radiation promising to fry every unshielded piece of technology in its path, including their fragile shuttle. "Can we outrun it?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Nina shook her head. "Not with these engines. We need a plan. Fast." Alexander's mind raced, assessing their options. The shuttle shuddered as they cleared Europa's thin atmosphere, debris from the earlier space battle peppering their hull. "I have an idea," Nina said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with tenacity. "But it's risky, and I'll need everyone's help." As Nina explained her plan to create a makeshift radiation shield, Alexander focused on piloting the shuttle through the treacherous debris field. His years as a merchant pilot had honed his skills, but this was pushing him to his limits. The shuttle groaned as he executed a series of tight maneuvers, narrowly avoiding a twisted chunk of what was once a Zarkthai fighter. A glancing blow from a smaller piece of debris sent them into a spin, alarm screaming as Alexander fought to regain control. "We're losing oxygen," Dr. Chen reported from the back, her voice strained. "The hull's been breached." Alexander gritted his teeth, finally stabilizing their flight path. "Nina, how's that shield coming?" "Almost there," she replied, her voice muffled as she worked in the shuttle's cramped engine compartment. "But we're going to need more power." As if on cue, the shuttle's engines sputtered, their already limited speed dropping further. Alexander stared at the navigation display, watching as the solar flare's leading edge crept ever closer. A decision crystallized in his mind. It was risky, potentially suicidal, but it was their only chance. "Hold on, everyone," he called out, altering their course. "We're making for Io." Nina's head snapped up. "Io? Alexander? The radiation levels there are—" "Less than what that flare will hit us with," he finished. "Its magnetic field might give us the extra protection we need." As they approached the volcanic moon, the shuttle's systems began to fail one by one. The makeshift radiation shield sparked to life just as the edge of the solar flare reached them, enveloping the shuttle in a shimmering bubble of energy. The shield held, but at a cost. Life support failed entirely, leaving them with only minutes of breathable air. As Alexander struggled to keep the shuttle on course, his vision beginning to blur from lack of oxygen, a sleek ship of unfamiliar design appeared alongside them. "Are you seeing this?" he asked Nina, his words slurring slightly. She nodded, her face pale. Friend or foe? Before Alexander could respond, he felt the unmistakable pull of a tractor beam. The mysterious ship was drawing them in. As their shuttle was guided into a spacious docking bay, Alexander and Nina shared a look of mingled hope and apprehension. They had escaped immediate danger, but they were far from safe. The airlock hissed open, and Alexander tensed, ready for a fight. Instead, a woman swaggered in, her stance casual but her eyes sharp and assessing. "Well," she said, a crooked smile playing on her lips, "looks like I've caught myself some interesting cargo. Captain Zara Vex, at your service. Now, who might you be, and what kind of trouble have you brought to my doorstep?" "Doorstep?" Captain Zara Vex's eyes glinted with curiosity as she surveyed the ragtag group before her. Alexander stepped forward, his posture tense but diplomatic. "Captain Vex, we're grateful for your timely intervention. I'm Alexander, and this is Nina. We've just escaped a dangerous situation on Europa and—" "Europa?" Zara interrupted, her eyebrows rising. "That's Zarkthai territory. You've got some explaining to do." Before Alexander could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Zara cursed under her breath and rushed to a nearby console. "Looks like we've got company," she muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "Hold on tight, folks. We're about to make a run for it." The ship lurched into motion, throwing its passengers off balance. Through the view screen, Alexander caught glimpses of sleek, predatory vessels giving chase. "Zarkthai's backup," Nina said grimly, steadying herself against a bulkhead. As Zara expertly maneuvered her ship through a debris field, evading their pursuers, Alexander's mind raced. They needed a safe haven, somewhere beyond Zarkthai's reach. "Captain," he called out, an idea forming. "What's the nearest neutral space station?" Zara glanced back at him, a hint of approval in her eyes. "Clever thinking. There's one about 2 light years from here. It's called Nexus Point." "Can we make it?" Nina asked, her eyes darting between the view screen and the ship's occupants. Zara grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. "Watch me." The next hours were a blur of tension and bursts of frantic activity. Zara's piloting skills were put to the test as she outmaneuvered Zarkthai's forces, using asteroid belts and gravitational fields to their advantage. Alexander and Nina pitched in where they could, their experience from their recent ordeal proving invaluable. As they approached Nexus Point, Zara opened a communication channel. "Nexus Point Control, this is Captain Zara Vex of the independent vessel Stardancer, requesting emergency docking and asylum for myself and passengers." There was a tense moment of silence before a response crackled through. "Stardancer, this is Nexus Point Control. Asylum request acknowledged. Proceed to docking Bay 17. As they maneuvered into the massive space station, Alexander felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They were safe for now, but what awaited them? The answer came as soon as they disembarked. A diverse group stood waiting, their body language a mix of wariness and curiosity. At the forefront was a stern-faced woman in an Earth military uniform, her insignia marking her as an admiral. "I am Admiral Hernandez," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "You will all come with me for debriefing." Before Alexander could respond, another figure stepped forward. Tall and imposing, with pointed ears and an impassive expression, She could only be Vulcan. "I am Ambassador Talar," she stated. "The Vulcan citizen among you must be remanded to our custody immediately." Nina tensed beside Alexander, her hand instinctively seeking his. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as the two officials faced off. Suddenly, a commotion from the rear of the welcoming committee drew everyone's attention. Alexander's blood ran cold as he recognized the figure being brought forward in restraints. Zarkthai, looking worse for wear but still defiant, locked eyes with Alexander. "Well, well," he sneered. "Looks like we all made it to the party." Admiral Hernandez's eyes narrowed. "You know this criminal?" Before Alexander could answer, yet another voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps we can all discuss this in a more suitable setting?" The speaker was unlike any being Alexander had ever seen. Tall and willowy, with iridescent skin and multifaceted eyes, he exuded an aura of wisdom and authority. "I am Zarkon," he introduced himself, "lead scientist of the Interstellar Cooperative. I believe we all have much to discuss." As the group moved towards a conference room, Alexander felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Whatever happened in the next few hours would shape the future of interspecies relations for generations to come. Nina squeezed his hand, her eyes conveying a mix of drive and uncertainty. "Together?" she whispered. Alexander nodded, squaring his shoulders. Together. They stepped into the conference room, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The door sealed behind them with a soft hiss, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their adventure. As the door sealed behind them, Alexander and Nina found themselves facing a diverse group of galactic representatives. The tension in the room was palpable, with each faction eyeing the others warily. Admiral Hernandez spoke first, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Now that we're all here, let's get to the heart of the matter. We have a potentially explosive situation on our hands, and we need solutions, not finger-pointing." Ambassador Talar raised an eyebrow. "I concur. However, we cannot ignore the fact that Vulcan citizens have been directly impacted by recent events. Their safety must be a priority." Zarkon stepped forward, his iridescent skin shimmering under the conference room lights. "Perhaps we should hear from those most directly involved. Alexander, Nina, would you care to share your perspective?" Alexander glanced at Nina, who gave him a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, he addressed the room. "What we've experienced goes beyond any single species or planet. We're facing a threat that could destabilize the entire galaxy if left unchecked." Nina continued, her voice steady. "We propose a joint human-alien diplomatic and trade expedition. A mobile embassy, if you will, to foster cooperation and cultural exchange across the galaxy." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, some skeptical, others intrigued. Captain Zara Vex leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. "And who exactly would lead this little adventure?" "We would," Alexander said firmly, gesturing to himself and Nina. "We've seen firsthand the consequences of division and mistrust. It's time for a new approach." Admiral Hernandez's eyes narrowed. "And you believe you're qualified for such a role?" "With all due respect, Admiral," Nina replied, "our recent experiences have given us unique insights into interspecies relations. We've built trust with various factions, including those traditionally at odds with each other." Zarkon nodded thoughtfully. "The Interstellar Cooperative has long advocated for such initiatives. I believe this proposal has merit." As discussions continued, the idea gained traction. Even the skeptics began to see the potential benefits of a unified approach to galactic diplomacy and trade. Hours later, as the meeting adjourned, Alexander and Nina found themselves tasked with assembling a crew for their expedition. They immediately approached Dr. Chen, who was examining her tablet with intense focus. "Dr. Chen," Alexander said, "we could use your expertise in xenobiology on this mission. Would you consider joining us?" The doctor looked up, her eyes bright with interest. "After what we've been through, try and stop me." Nina turned to Captain Vex, who was lounging near the exit. "Captain, your skills and connections could be invaluable. We'd be honored to have you on board." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Turning a smuggler into a diplomat? That's a neat trick, but I'm intrigued. Count me in." As word of their mission spread, volunteers from various species began to come forward. Each brought unique skills and perspectives, forming a diverse crew that embodied the very spirit of their expedition. However, their preparations were interrupted by urgent news. Admiral Hernandez called them to a secure briefing room, her face grim. "We've received intelligence that remnants of the slave trader organization are regrouping," she informed them. "They're planning to disrupt the alliance before it can take root." Alexander felt Nina tense beside him. "What do you need us to do?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "We need you to gather evidence and dismantle their network," the admiral replied. "It's a covert operation, off the books. Can you handle it?" Nina and Alexander exchanged a look, years of shared experiences and unspoken communication, passing between them in an instant. "We'll do it," Nina said firmly. With the help of Zarktai's inside knowledge and Zara's underworld contacts, they began to infiltrate the slave trading hub. Disguised as potential buyers, they navigated a world of shadowy deals and whispered threats. At a bustling marketplace on a frontier planet, Alexander and Nina found themselves face to face with the harsh realities of the slave trade. Beings of all species were displayed like merchandise, their eyes hollow with despair. "Over here," a gruff voice called out. A hulking Traxian trader beckoned them closer. "I've got some prime specimens, fresh from the outer colonies." Alexander forced himself to maintain a neutral expression as they approached. Nina, her features schooled into Vulcan impassivity, began to inspect the merchandise. "Interesting," she murmured, her voice pitched low for Alexander's ears only. "Some of these beings show signs of genetic manipulation. This operation is more sophisticated than we thought." As they moved through the market, gathering information and planting covert surveillance devices, Alexander caught sight of a familiar face. Among a group of captives, a Vulcan woman stared back at him, her eyes widening in recognition. Nina followed his gaze and inhaled sharply. "Talana," she whispered, "my former colleague. We can't leave her here." Alexander nodded, his mind racing. "We'll find a way," he promised. "But we need to be careful. One wrong move could blow our cover and jeopardize the entire mission." As they continued their investigation, the scale of the slave trade operation became clear. It wasn't just a few rogue traders, but a vast network involving corrupt officials from multiple species, including some from Earth and Vulcan. During a high-stakes auction, Alexander found himself bidding on a group of enslaved scientists, including Talana. His heart pounded as the prices climbed higher, knowing that each increase brought them closer to both salvation and potential discovery. Nina, meanwhile, worked the room, gathering intelligence and planting seeds of dissent among the buyers. Her Vulcan mental disciplines allowed her to maintain her composure even as she witnessed the horrific treatment of the slaves. As the auction reached its climax, Alexander made a bold move. "I'll take the entire lot," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. The auctioneer, a sleek Ferengi, grinned widely. "A most generous offer. Do we have any other bidders?" In the tense moments that followed, Alexander and Nina exchanged a subtle glance. Their plan was in motion, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. They had to extract the slaves, expose the operation, and escape with their lives, all without compromising the fragile interspecies alliance they had worked so hard to build. As the auctioneer's hammer fell, sealing the deal, Alexander felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. The real challenge was just beginning, and the consequences of failure would echo across the galaxy. Galaxy! Alexander took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. As they prepared to leave the auction house, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Guards rushed in, shouting orders and brandishing weapons. Alexander and Nina exchanged quick glances, their hearts racing as they realized their cover might be blown. "This way," hissed a familiar voice. Captain Zaravex appeared from the shadows, gesturing towards a hidden exit. "I've got the Star Dancer ready for immediate takeoff." They hurried through the back alleys of the frontier planet, Talana and the other freed slaves following closely behind. The sound of pursuit grew louder as they neared the spaceport. "We're not going to make it," Nina said, her Vulcan calm slipping as she glanced back at their pursuers. Alexander's mind raced, searching for a solution. Suddenly, he spotted a row of hovercrafts parked nearby. "Zara, can you hotwire one of these?" The captain grinned. "Watch me." Moments later, they were speeding towards the Stardancer, the wind whipping past them as Zara expertly maneuvered through the crowded streets. As they approached the ship, Alexander activated his communicator. "Dr. Chen, we need immediate takeoff. Things got a little hot down here." The Stardancer's engines roared to life as they rushed up the boarding ramp. Zara sprinted to the cockpit, taking control from Dr. Chen and expertly piloting the ship out of the spaceport. As they broke atmosphere, Alexander allowed himself a moment of relief. He turned to Nina, who was tending to the freed slaves. "We did it," he said softly. Nina nodded, her eyes conveying a mix of exhaustion and drive. "This is just the beginning, Alexander. We have the evidence we need. But exposing this network won't be easy." Their moment was interrupted by an urgent beep from the ship's communication system. Admiral Hernandez's face appeared on the screen, her expression grave. "We've received your data, and it's worse than we feared. The corruption goes deeper than anyone suspected, but we have a more immediate problem." Alexander straightened, sensing the weight of the Admiral's words. "What is it?" "Your expedition ship is ready for its maiden voyage, but we've detected unusual activity near your first scheduled stop. We need you to investigate immediately." Nina joined Alexander at the console. "What kind of activity?" "Unknown," Hernandez replied, "but it's on a planet previously thought to be uninhabited. We're picking up massive energy signatures and atmospheric disturbances. Your mission has just become a lot more complicated." Alexander nodded, his mind already shifting gears. "We're on our way, Admiral. Send us the coordinates." As the communication ended, Alexander turned to his crew. "Looks like our plans have changed. We're heading into uncharted territory." Zara set the new course, her fingers dancing over the controls. "At least it'll be exciting," she quipped. As the Stardancer accelerated towards their new destination, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to stumble into something far bigger than they had anticipated. Days later, as they approached the mysterious planet, the ship's sensors began to pick up increasingly erratic readings. The view screen showed a world shrouded in swirling clouds, punctuated by flashes of lightning that seemed to span continents. "I've never seen atmospheric activity like this," Dr. Chen murmured, her eyes wide as she studied the readouts. "It's as if the entire planet is one massive storm system." As they entered orbit, a crackling message came through their communications system. The language was unfamiliar, but the universal translator quickly adjusted. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered Zephyrian airspace. State your purpose or be destroyed." Alexander stepped forward, his voice calm and authoritative. "This is Captain Alexander of the Earth-allied expedition ship Stardancer. We come in peace and offer our assistance. We've detected unusual atmospheric activity on your planet. Is everything all right?" There was a long pause before the response came. "Captain Alexander, your arrival is unexpected. We are in the midst of a planetary crisis. Our weather control systems have failed, and we face total destruction. If you truly wish to help, you may attempt to land. But be warned, the storm makes any descent extremely dangerous." Alexander looked at Nina, seeing his own tenacity reflected in her eyes. "We'll find a way down," he told the Zephyrian contact. "Send us coordinates for the safest possible landing zone." As Zara began the treacherous descent, the ship bucked and shuddered in the violent winds. Alexander gripped his chair, watching as the swirling clouds parted to reveal glimpses of a world in chaos. Massive structures that seemed designed to pierce the sky lay in ruins, while others, still standing, pulsed with energy, clearly struggling against the storm. "This is going to be rough," Zara warned, her voice tense with concentration. "Brace for impact." The Stardancer slammed onto the landing pad, skidding several meters before coming to a stop. As the engines powered down, an eerie silence fell over the ship, broken only by the muffled howling of the wind outside. Alexander stood, addressing his crew. "This is what we've trained for. We have a chance to make a real difference here, to show what interspecies cooperation can achieve. Dr. Chen, I want you to start analyzing the atmospheric data immediately. Nina, you and I will meet with the Zephyrian leadership. The rest of you, Prepare for emergency operations. We don't know what we'll find out there, but we need to be ready for anything. As the airlock hissed open, they were met by a group of tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin that seemed to shimmer in response to the electrical charges in the air. One stepped forward, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the flashes of lightning above. "I am Ether, Chief Scientist of the Zephirian Weather Control Council," the being said, its voice melodic despite the urgency in its tone. "Your arrival is most fortuitous. Come, there is much to discuss and little time. The storm grows stronger by the moment." As they followed Ether into a massive, crystal-like structure, Alexander couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and trepidation. They had come seeking diplomatic ties and instead found themselves thrust into a battle against nature itself. And somewhere in the chaos of this storm-racked world, he sensed the first stirrings of a mystery that could change the course of galactic history. The doors sealed behind them with a resonant hum, shutting out the howling wind and leaving them in a space that thrummed with hardly restrained energy. Ether turned to face them, its expression unreadable, but its voice tinged with what Alexander interpreted as hope. "Now," Ether said, "let us see if your aid can turn the tide of this calamity." "Calamity?" Ether continued, leading them deeper into the crystalline structure. The air inside crackled with static electricity, and Alexander felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. As they entered a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and pulsing energy conduits, Nina suddenly stumbled. Alexander caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Nina nodded, her complexion pale but her eyes clear. "I'm fine. Just a momentary dizzy spell. It's passing now." Ether turned, its multifaceted eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Your physiology, it's different from ours. Are you sure you can withstand the electromagnetic fluctuations in our atmosphere?" "I'll manage," Nina said firmly, straightening her posture. "We have more pressing matters to attend to." Alexander nodded, impressed by her resilience. "Ether, what exactly are we dealing with here? How did your weather control systems fail?" Before the Zephirian could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A new hologram flickered to life, displaying a map of the planet's surface. Red indicators flashed across multiple regions. "It's General Stormbringer!" Ether exclaimed, its iridescent skin pulsing with agitation. "He's launched a coup attempt. His forces are seizing control of our secondary weather control stations." Alexander's mind raced, quickly assessing the situation. "Nina, contact the Star Dancer. We need Dr. Chen to start analyzing the atmospheric data immediately. Ether, we'll need a secure communication channel to coordinate with our ship." As Nina relayed the orders, Alexander turned back to the Zephirian scientist. "Tell me everything you know about this General Stormbringer and his forces. We need to formulate a plan quickly." Ether's explanation was interrupted by another alarm. A Zephirian technician called out, "Unidentified ships entering the system. They match the energy signatures of known slave trader vessels." Alexander's eyes met Nina's, a silent understanding passing between them. The situation had just become far more complex. "Captain," Nina said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "we need to deploy our resources strategically. I suggest sending Captain Zara Vex and her ship to establish an early warning system in orbit. Her expertise in evading detection will be crucial in monitoring the incoming vessels." Alexander nodded in agreement. "Make it happen, and get me a secure line to Admiral Hernandez. We may need reinforcements." As Nina coordinated with the Star Dancer, Alexander turned to Ether. "We need to integrate our technologies quickly. Is there a way to combine our weather control methods with your existing systems?" Ether's eyes widened. "It's possible, but it would require extensive modifications. We've never attempted to merge our technology with that of another species." "We don't have a choice," Alexander said firmly. "Nina, work with Dr. Chen and the Zephirian scientists. Focus on integrating Vulcan and Zephirian weather control technologies. It might be our best shot at countering both Stormbringer and the slave traders." As the team scrambled to implement their plans, Alexander felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. He moved to a central console, studying the tactical displays. We need to launch a two-pronged assault on Stormbringer's stronghold, he announced. I'll lead a ground force to breach the facility's defenses. Nina, I want you coordinating from here. Use the enhanced weather control system to create favorable conditions for our team and hinder Stormbringer's forces. Nina nodded, her fingers already flying over the alien controls. I can create localized storms and fog banks to mask our approach. Just give me the signal when you're ready to move. Alexander turned to address the assembled Zephirian loyalists and his own crew members. This won't be easy. We're facing enemies on two fronts, using unfamiliar technology on a planet we barely understand. But together, we have a chance to save this world and strike a blow against the slave trade network. Are you with me? The response was immediate and resolute. Humans, Vulcans, and Zephirians alike voiced their support, united in their perseverance to face the coming storm. As Alexander prepared to lead his strike team, he caught Nina's eye one last time. No words were needed. Their shared look conveyed all the unspoken emotions and wishes for each other's safety. With a final nod to his diverse crew, Alexander headed for the exit, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them on the storm-racked surface of this alien world. The fate of the Zephirian people, and perhaps the future of interspecies cooperation, now rested on their shoulders. The fate of the Zephirian people, and perhaps the future of interspecies cooperation, now rested on their actions. As Alexander led his strike team across the storm-ravaged landscape, the winds howled and lightning crackled overhead. The team moved swiftly, using the cover of the tempest to approach Stormbringer's stronghold. Nina's voice crackled through their comms, guiding them through the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, their mission took an unexpected turn. A massive tremor shook the ground, nearly throwing them off their feet. Alexander's comm unit lit up with an urgent transmission from the Stardancer. "Captain?" Dr. Chen's voice came through, tight with concern. "We're detecting a massive energy surge from orbit. It's not Zephirian in origin." Before Alexander could respond, the sky above them tore open. A colossal ship, easily dwarfing the Stardancer, emerged from the swirling clouds. Its hull was scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of countless battles. "Slave traders," Alexander breathed, recognizing the distinctive design. The ship's presence seemed to intensify the storm, as if the planet itself was reacting to this new threat. Lightning arced across the sky, striking the ground dangerously close to Alexander's team. "Nina," Alexander called through the comm, "we need to abort the assault on Stormbringer. This is bigger than we thought." "Agreed," Nina replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Return to base immediately. We're picking up a distress signal from a nearby system. It seems to be connected to the slave trader ship." As Alexander and his team made their way back through the tempest, the situation on Zephyria rapidly evolved. The arrival of the slave trader vessel had inadvertently united the Zephirians against a common enemy. Even General Stormbringer's forces had ceased their attacks, focusing instead on the new threat from above. Back at the command center, Alexander found Nina coordinating with both Zephirian leaders and the Stardancer's crew. The holographic displays showed a dire situation unfolding. "The distress call is coming from a planet in the neighboring system," Nina explained as Alexander approached. "It's a refugee crisis on an unprecedented scale. Millions of beings from various species, many of them former slaves, have sought asylum there." Ether, the Zephirian scientist, joined them at the display. "The slave traders must have followed the refugees here. Our world may have been collateral damage in their pursuit." Alexander studied the data scrolling across the screens. The refugee planet was clearly overwhelmed, its resources strained to the breaking point. The situation was volatile, with tensions rising between different species and the planet's government on the verge of collapse. "We can't ignore this," Alexander said, his voice firm with dedication. "Nina, contact the Interspecies Council. We're going to need all the support we can get." Nina nodded, her fingers already flying over the console. "What about Zephyria? We can't just abandon them to the storm." Alexander turned to Ether. "If we help you stabilize your weather control systems, can your people hold off the slave traders long enough for us to address the refugee crisis?" Ether's multifaceted eyes gleamed with persistence. "With your technology integrated into our systems, We stand a chance. Go, help those in need. We will endure. Over the next few hours, the Star Dancer's crew worked tirelessly alongside the Zephyrians to fortify their defenses. Dr. Chen's breakthroughs in weather control technology proved invaluable, allowing the Zephyrians to harness the storm itself as a weapon against potential invaders. As the Star Dancer prepared to depart, Alexander addressed his crew. What we're about to undertake may be our most challenging mission yet. We're not just facing a humanitarian crisis. We're looking at a pivotal moment that could reshape galactic society. Everyone on board volunteered for this expedition, knowing the risks. If anyone wishes to remain here on Zephyria, now's the time to say so. The crew's response was unanimous. Not a single member stepped back. With a nod of appreciation, Alexander gave the order to launch. As the Star Dancer broke through Zephiria's turbulent atmosphere, they could see the massive slave trader ship still looming in orbit. Zara's expert piloting kept them out of the enemy's sensor range as they slipped past and entered warp. The journey to the refugee planet was tense. Every crew member knew that what awaited them would challenge everything they had trained for. Nina spent the time poring over the limited data they had received, trying to formulate a plan. As they dropped out of warp near their destination, the true scale of the crisis became apparent. The space around the planet was crowded with ships of all sizes, some belonging to refugees, others to various factions, either aiding or opposing the asylum seekers. Multiple ships approaching, Zara reported from the helm. They're charging weapons. Alexander stood at the center of the bridge, his voice calm but authoritative. Open a channel to all ships in the sector. It's time to see if diplomacy can prevent more bloodshed. As Nina worked to establish the communication link, Alexander prepared to face perhaps the greatest challenge of his career. The fate of millions now hung in the balance, and the decisions made in the next few moments could alter the course of galactic history.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.